To understand life in the Amarr Empire is to grasp the experience of more individuals than any other culture across New Eden. Not including slaves, there are 21.4 trillion souls living under Amarrian authoritarian theocracy. This might be only marginally larger than the Gallente Federation's 20 trillion, but once you add the 10.7 trillion slaves living under the Empire's thumb, the true scale of the manpower involved comes into focus. As well as by number, the Amarr Empire is broad and far-reaching by land, laying claim to 40% of the inhabited solar systems, stretching from the undeveloped frontiers of Iridia to the bustling imperial city of Dam Torsad in Domain. Unsurprisingly, as with any society of this size, the experience of an average citizen of the Empire is going to vary hugely depending on where you want to zoom in for a closer look. In this video, we're going to dive deeper on the origins of Amarr, its bloodlines, royal houses, governmental structure, and in the course of that analysis, much of its ongoing history. Hours and hours could be spent focusing on each individual emperor's actions and the road they paved to the contemporary empire, so know that this is far from exhaustive. The lore analysed in this video is fact-checked through a variety of sources, including the EVE Universe lore pages, New Eden News, EVE Online's many book releases, and occasionally the first-hand accounts of lore events published by players throughout EVE's history. These sources are of course occasionally contradictory. With EVE's in-universe history stretching on for millennia and its real-life history spanning decades, it's unsurprising that as many different writers turn their hand to this world-building, different interpretations of key events and the order of their occurrence have sprung forth. Nevertheless, if anything crops up that you think is a mistake, I'd love to hear about it in the comments so that I can make any necessary corrections. This is my first time doing a video like this, but I feel that EVE lore is majorly unappreciated now that I've really tried to immerse myself in it for the past couple of months. So I'd like to do my best to find the same parts that really grabbed me and make those accessible here in my own words. The structure of Amarrian society is unapologetically fixated on bloodlines, and despite the certainly forgivable assumption of homogeneity that comes with the Empire's public image, the sheer size of it means a wide array of ethnicities under the same flag. But the biggest of bloodlines in terms of representation by far is that of the true Amarr, a name that certainly plays its cards face up. The interpretation of true Amarrian ancestry has become the subject of many a debate, but the definition under law is that of an individual with non-Khanid ancestry who can trace their genealogical record to pre-spaceflight Amarr Prime. Hardline conservative factions would go so far as to require this genealogy reaches back to the inhabitants of the Amarr island prior to the arrival of the Eudorians, who didn't reach the island until 20,022 AD. But with a 50-year window of mercantile trading and legal transport between the Amarr island and the Eudorian continents, followed of course by the methodical conquering and enslavement of the disparate Eudorian states in the Reclaiming, few self-described true Amarr can confidently say that they lack any Eudorian ancestry whatsoever. There is a wide-ranging estimate that between 25 and 75% of the true Amarrian population have at least one Eudorian ancestor, but unsurprisingly, such studies are not officially sanctioned, and self-reported surveys on the topic are unlikely to yield accurate results, given the social stigma of Eudorian lineage. The true Amarr are disproportionately represented in the Empire's highest social classes, not just by notions of racial superiority or military conquest, but by direct reference in the Amarr faith's religious scriptures as the chosen people of God. It should not be ignored, however, that the scriptures in question number in the millions of volumes, and much is added and removed by Imperial theologians, emperors, saints, and priests as necessary. A powerful and unfettered existence is not quite limited to the true Amarr. The life of those of Khanid ancestry who remained loyal to the Empire after the Khanid Rebellion is one with great privilege not often granted to the other bloodlines of the Empire. A Khanid citizen of the Empire can enjoy virtual equality with true Amarr citizens with only two key exceptions. Firstly, that they lack some of the same representation in the structure of Amarr's royal families. Garka Khanid, known in the Khanid Kingdom under his regnal title of Khanid II, was given a seat on the Amarr Privy Council 17 years ago in YC 111. His son Farouk, or Khanid III, has carried this forward and remains on the Privy Council today. However, his representation, very often via delegate rather than pro se, is undoubtedly focused on the interests of the Khanid kingdom rather than the Khanid who remained within the Amarr Empire. Secondly, the Khanid are not exempt from being placed in indentured servitude of the true Amarr, but such slavery is typically reserved as a punishment for criminality. The Khanid people receive such preferential treatment thanks to a close relationship with the true Amarr that long predates the Empire's starfaring days. As less technologically developed inhabitants of the Eudorian-dominated continents, back when Amarr Prime was simply known as Athra, the Khanid took the opportunity to side with the true Amarr during the Reclaiming and quickly assimilated to the Amarrian faith. The Nakuni are the third most populous free and liberated bloodlines in Amarr society, but unlike the Khanid, had to earn their freedom relatively recently. The Nakuni's first interaction with the Empire came as the arrival of the Amarrian 51st Exploration Corps on the Nakuni's Iridian home planet of Mishi IV destabilized the water-dominated feudal system that had reigned for thousands of years. While initially subjugated and enslaved, the Amarr noted the Nakuni slaves' religious devotion and saw them as a promising addition to Amarrian society. This, along with the fresh target of the Minmatar providing the Empire with a new influx of slave labor, allowed the Nakuni to gradually integrate with free Amarrian society. Unlike the true Amarr and Khanid, however, the Nakuni have so far very rarely ascended to Amarrian nobility or prestige. Instead, the Nakuni are very well represented in mercantilism, craftsmanship, military service, but also in organized crime. The Nakuni experienced a great deal of cultural erasure during their journey from subjugation to emancipation, but even today typically live in tight-knit Nakuni districts in cities across the Amarr Empire and Gallente Federation, following largely their own internal systems of family prestige and hierarchy. Within these communities, a slightly altered form of the Amarr faith is practiced while the Theology Council turns a blind eye, provided such alterations don't overstep into the realm of heresy. Amatars of the Empire hold a similar history of earned freedom to the Nakuni, but hail from the Nefantar tribe of the Matari homeworlds, specifically the Tronhadar Delta on the continent of Hudia on Matar. A powerful tribe throughout much of the rich Matari history, the Nefantar suffered immense losses in clashes with Amarr slave raiders, dividing influential families on the best course of action to preserve the tribe. As Amarr slave raids continued, the raiders observed that some Nefantar families had stopped open resistance, instead trading information and cooperation in return for immunity. This leverage over the information shared with the Amarr gained the Nefantar enormous power over the remaining Matari tribes, gradually becoming a proxy for Amarrian interests up to the eventual conquest and occupation of Matar in 22480 AD by the hand of Emperor Damius III. Prior to that invasion, the Nefantar safely relocated their capital to Hjoromold with safe passage and assistance granted by the Amarr Empire. It was at this time they were given the moniker of Amatar by the Emperor and fastidiously indoctrinated with the tenets of the Amarr faith. The Amatar were spared from the mass enslavement of their former brethren of Matar, experiencing a great deal of technological development under the injection of infrastructural investment from the rest of the Empire, as well as additional labor in the form of their own supply of slaves. Despite this alignment of convenience and self-preservation, Nefantar opinions did not remain homogeneously content with their new reality. After the brutal annihilation of the Starkmanir tribe on Starkman Prime, now known as RZ2, some Nefantar families covertly assisted Starkmanir refugees unknown to the Empire. It was the perceived extermination of the Starkmanir that lit the fuse for the Great Rebellion, an event that, along with many other significant impacts on the landscape of New Eden, led to the Amatar evacuating their capital of Hjoromold, moving to Derelic. It was here that the diaspora of Starkmanir lived in secret on the planet of Haltazan, now Jaraza 6, for centuries before their existence was exposed by the renowned Minmatar Republic biotech corporation IFA & Co., along with the help of the Sisters of Eve. The Amatar found a more formal place in the fabric of Amarrian politics once they settled into Derelic, receiving semi-sovereign control of the region as a puppet state of the Amarr Empire known as the Amatar Mandate. The Brutor population of the Amarr Empire is enormous, but almost entirely enslaved. The tribe remain extremely prominent in the Minmatar Republic, often portrayed as the military spearhead claiming responsibility for the freedom of the Minmatar people. Given their people remain by far the most numerous amongst the Empire's slaves, this claim is hard to dispel. While the Brutor were enslaved in huge numbers during the Empire's initial conquests of the Matari tribes, their popularity among the Amarrian slave owners led to intensive breeding programs, boosting their numbers significantly. The Brutor originated as a splinter tribe of the Starkmanir, contributing to their focus on the liberation of the remnants of the Starkmanir given refuge by the Amatar elites. Life as a Brutor slave in the Amarr Empire would be a strenuous one, being a bloodline of slave often assigned to hard physical labour. But despite this, there are some free Brutor in the Empire. Life for them, however, is not much better. A consistent pattern in Amarr society is that the ostracised poorest of free citizens live in often considerably poorer conditions than the slaves. Even with their liberty, life primarily consists of menial hard labour jobs with which a life can be eked out in squalor. The Sabiastor make up the second largest workforce of enslaved former Minmatar tribes in the Empire, but face considerably less prejudice and negative stereotyping by Amarrian society. Typically assigned to complex engineering and service roles, Sabiastor often live in more favourable conditions with less cruel treatment. Some free Sabiastor have more closely integrated into the social and economic structures of Amarr, but nevertheless remain looked down upon. Any social ascension similar to that of the Amatar is limited for the Sabiastor by nature of the tribe's prior and continuing strong influence in the Minmatar Republic. The pre-Republic Minmatar Empire has the Sabiastor to thank in no small part for the development of spacefaring technology that allowed the tribes to cooperate and later resist during the Amarr occupation. Verrochior slaves in the Empire, while spared much of the physical cruelty applied liberally to other Minmatar bloodlines by the Amarr, suffer a very specific variety of spiritual cruelty and erasure. Originally part of a nomadic tribe dense with shamans and mysticism, the Amarr occupiers quickly identified the Verrochior as a particular threat to the indoctrination of the Minmatar to the Amarr faith. As such, many Verrochior were targeted by inquisitors for re-education or extermination as appropriate. The Verrochior of the Minmatar Republic were ultimately able to preserve their rituals and culture, still maintaining a very strong role in spreading Matari religious practices amongst Minmatar diasporas in other regions of New Eden. The Verrochior of the Empire, however, had their zeal redirected, often serving as clerical slaves forced to teach the tenets of the Amarr faith. There exist small pockets of free Verrochior in the Empire, but they still typically occupy roles in the Amarr religious structure as priests or missionaries. The Krujor bloodline is a considerably rarer one to see in the Empire, given the difficulty the Amarr occupiers had in taking them alive as slaves, and continuing challenge of keeping them subjugated for hard labour. As such, even fewer Krujor live free lives in Amarr space, facing considerable prejudice and discrimination for their strong resistance to the Empire. Krujor in the Minmatar Republic see their comparative lack of representation in the enslaved workforces of Amarr as a point of considerable pride and a sign of superior resilience. This fierce resistance to Amarrian occupation helped provide safety to Verrochior mystics and contributed greatly to the preservation of Matari rituals and customs, despite the Empire's campaign of erasure and indoctrination. The Amarr Empire's obsession with bloodline and racial purity is not just limited to its nobility and higher social classes. The term shrouded is used to refer to any slave where their lineage cannot be determined, or who has mixed heritage specifically such that no single race makes up for at least 25% of their bloodline. Many shrouded are also labelled as such simply because of loss of records that could be used to trace lineage, and as such these shrouded slaves frequently exist without proper documentation, making it nearly impossible for them to be freed from servitude, even if such an action was desired. Beyond these aforementioned bloodlines, many other smaller minorities exist within Amarr society, but typically only with the support of relatives in their native empires, leading to relatively prosperous lives. Many come looking for new business opportunities, others are converts to the Amarr faith embarking on a pilgrimage to a place where they can more actively engage in the culture of worship. While few of these other bloodlines are actively sought after for slavery, enslavement still remains a potential punishment for criminal behaviour. Even as bloodlines are a key pillar of the hierarchy of Amarrian society, as with almost any society, the economic classes of Amarr can often be disparate enough to overrule even the strongest of racial or religious prejudices. Structurally, these classes are those of a feudal theocracy, as the key determinants of position and rank are the owning of land, employment of workers, possession of slaves, and perceived devoutness of faith. The highest ranking of the non-royal nobility of Amarr are known as holders, While this concept and terminology long predate the Amarr Empire in its current spacefaring form, the role of holders in the modern day is a complicated, perhaps even convoluted one. While holders are officially entitled to be addressed as Lord or Lady, traditional and historical factors have contributed to some holders taking on the titles of Duke or Duchess. Despite these further titles having no basis in law, they are rarely without a de facto increase in power or influence coming from widely acknowledged feats of leadership or intrigue. To be a holder, one must be landed, be that a small property with but a few slaves and workers, entire planets, or potentially even entire systems. Holders are given extensive direct control over their fiefdoms, allowing for significant autonomy in laws, finances, and local political structures. Some large-scale holders, such as system overseers, may have multiple lower-level holders within their jurisdiction who are granted varying levels of devolved autonomy. It is worth noting that while a holder's family are all considered part of the Empire's nobility, only the holder is directly entitled to the legal benefits of this landed status in society. As such, impoverished or ostracized nobles are not entirely rare, and many who are nominally in the nobility may still need to work. They are, however, unsurprisingly often well connected enough to secure low-stress positions, and while they're considerably less wealthy than the average noble, their quality of life is still leaps and bounds ahead of the commoners and slaves. As well as a holder's various rights and privileges, there is a specific duty that might seem otherwise antithetical to their typical motivations. Despite the great wealth that a holder's slave labor force can bring them, the Empire views slavery as a path to redemption rather than perpetual servitude. As such, holders are expected to convert, indoctrinate, and emancipate some of their slaves to serve as productive free commoners in Amarrian society. In practice, a slave in the Empire will likely not see freedom until several generations of their ancestors have served their master for a full lifetime. Holders were historically given significant religious and judicial power over their holdings, but as feudal theocracy met opportunistic capitalism, it became convenient for such matters to be handled by the more centralized Theology Council and Civic Court. The Empire would never admit such things openly, but while many of its nobility are devout to their faith on paper, they are often far more predisposed with religious politics and competition with other holders to handle such matters directly on the Empire's behalf. Holders can both gain and lose holdings through various means throughout their lifetime, and such privilege can slip through the fingers of an absent-minded lord or lady unwilling to play the game of imperial politics. While a holder can have their title stripped by the Empire for a variety of indiscretions, these invariably garner royal attention only due to the machinations of another ambitious holder, hopeful of being assigned further holdings as compensation for their service and loyalty. Assassinations and even open warfare are not unheard of either, especially in cases where the line of succession is disputed or open to interpretation. Holders' titles are almost always passed along to a nominated child heir, or in cases where the holder has no offspring, titles can move laterally to more extended family members. In the extreme circumstances where a holder has no eligible family, a nominated noble of another family can receive the title. However, it is in these circumstances where without clear succession, the Empire may dissolve or reassign the title at its own discretion. As a hierarchical system passed down onto the holder's offspring, the expansion of holdings via marriage is popular for long-term empire building. Similarly, titles can be sold and transferred partially or in full in the course of business, as long as any overseer of the holder consents to the transfer. Such transfers can also be made non-consensually in legal judgments. Holders must be careful not to let their holdings wither away too much, as retaining the legal title of holder without the access to resources and wealth that it often brings can be a cruel fate. As holders are traditionally forbidden from taking on regular work, a destitute holder with insufficient holdings or unable to access their holdings can end up trapped, unable to regain their lost wealth. An example of such a holder is the Duke of Pator. Despite nominal hereditary holder status of the Pator system, this long fell out of control of the Empire as the homeland of the Minmatar, now very much in control of the Minmatar Republic. The Duke still makes pronouncements from a rented office in Pator, but is of course ignored by those ostensibly under his jurisdiction who no longer answer to the feudal hierarchy of the Amarr Empire. Below the nobility and the holders of the Empire, with a considerable gap in wealth, power, and status, are the Empire's trillions of commoners. Aside from the most core tenets of the Amarrian faith and the devolved powers of feudal lords, commoners are free to work mostly unmolested. Rights of ownership, however, are far more complicated. Holders are uniquely entitled to property rights. However, they are able to lease and rent this to commoners on a temporary basis. In this way, commoners are always contributing generous sums of their income to their feudal lords through rent payments and taxation. There is also the matter of human capital. Given the holders' considerable sway in the slave trade, commoners struggle to compete with nobility on businesses that rely on manual labour, causing an uphill struggle for any entrepreneurial endeavours. Instead, commoners are most often stuck employed in businesses directly owned by the same holders, providing the slave labour, the space in which to operate, and the fiscal legislation to control the market for success. Social advantages also begin far earlier than at the age of employment, of course. Unlanded nobility, the family members of holders, are given every possible advantage in terms of education and networking. There are, however, exceptionally skilled business people who have achieved riches of envy to the empire's holders, most commonly in import or export markets, where wealth can be reinvested outside the jurisdiction of the feudal lords. Commoners unable to earn a living can suffer a punishing existence. With no social safety nets outside of selective and limited religious charities, life as a destitute commoner is a sorry one with little hope of social mobility. Below most commoners in the empire's economic classes is of course the slaves. While slaves are provided with shelter, sustenance, clothing, and medical care, the focus of these services is on continued hard labour. As such, the quality and attentiveness of this care can vary depending on the wealth of the slave's holder and the quality of a slave's work. This creates an environment in which holders neglect their slaves as much as is feasible without impacting the output of their businesses. Only a few more fortunate may be selected for a finer life as personal assistants to their respective holders, receiving a higher quality of food, medical care, and accommodation. At the top of Amarrian society are the royalty. The gap between commoners and nobility may be gargantuan, but this pales in comparison to the gap between the empire's royals and all others. Royalty in Amarr is split amongst a number of families, most recently 6, but there have been as few as 4 in recent years. These are the Ardishapa, Kador, Karnid, Khorazor, Sarum, and Tashma Khan families. A few centuries ago, the Karnid family was shunned from this official position and removed from the line of succession after the Karnid rebellion, but has since been re-added. Garka Karnid, regularly styled Karnid II, refused to perform the Shathal Sin ritual suicide required of him upon losing the selection trials for a new emperor in 22760 AD, won by Hydaron VII of the Kador family. This is seen as a vital process in the transition of power, assuring that aspirational snubbed rivals of the new emperor are not left to push claims on the title or dispute the true line of succession. This represented the first time in Amarrian history that the tradition would be broken, but it would not be the last. 23 years ago in YC 110, Shathal Sin was carried out after the selection of Dorium II of the Khorazor family, but 5 years later it was discovered that Jamil Sarum survived the ritual after her timely return to command defensive forces against a Minmatar Thukker invasion force, the Elder Fleet. There was little dispute at the validity of her suicide at the time of the succession trials, so it seems likely that Jamil broke the doctrine of sacred flesh and created a clone of herself. Her triumphant return at the Battle of Mechios in the system of Sarum Prime, Domain, made any such accusations dangerously unpopular, however. The Sarum family declared her return a miracle of faith, creating great popularity with the Empire's most zealous, and ultimately leading to her coronation to serve as Holy Ordained Empress of Creation until YC 117. Garka Karnid's refusal to perform the Shathal Sin ritual was met with much less popularity within the Empire, instead leading to the aforementioned expulsion from Amarrian society, the exile of the Order of St. Tetramon, and the foundation of the Karnid Kingdom. With this schism, the Empire went from 5 royal families and heirs to 4. The Theology Council, seeking to amend this, elevated the Tashma Khan family to heir status in the Empire. While the Tashma Khan family certainly hold the wealth and influence of royalty, Amarrian conservatives remain suspicious of the family's comparatively liberal views and Eudorian bloodline. While relations between the Amarr Empire and Karnid Kingdom were adversarial for some time after the schism, eventually the pressure of outside forces dwarfed their comparatively minor differences and led to peace and eventually cooperation. In YC 117, the Imperial Succession Committee re-added King Karnid II as a royal heir to the Empire, bringing the total number of royal houses and heirs from 5 to 6. While these royal houses of the empire are codified only in terms of their eligibility for succession, in practicality the heirs retain a level of devolved power within the empire, administering rules and regulations in their domains, and acting as an intermediary between the emperor's absolute authority and the empire's noble holders. The empire is vast, and the emperor would be hard-pressed to administrate it directly. Instead, a careful game of politics must be played, allowing the royal houses enough authority and autonomy to remain loyal, but not so loose of a leash as to incubate any aspirations of power outside the regular process of succession. This structure was not always the case, however. Early in the empire's history, the Council of Apostles was the ruling body, headed, but not generally subordinate to, the emperor. This process of governance was the status quo for many millennia, but would ultimately be upturned when the Council of Apostles was usurped during the reign of Zaragram II, the Mad Emperor of the Ardishipa family, who proclaimed himself the divine manifestation of God. After his assassination, the Council of Apostles' power exploded, as they sought to correct the Empire's course and erase as much of his reign as possible. The Apostles were never truly able to completely undo much of the law and policy that Zaragram implemented during his time as Emperor, but in 875 AD, when Emperor Hydaran V came to power, he put great effort into a change of government structure now known as the Moral Reforms. These reforms focused on centralizing power to the Emperor and putting them above the Council, ultimately dissolving the Council entirely. In order to achieve this, Hydaran V secured the loyalty of the 5 most powerful families in the Empire. At the time, this was the Ardishipa, Kador, Khanid, Khorazor, and Sarum families, who subsequently became the heirs and royal houses of this new structure of empire. As well as the secular role of imperial administration, the royalty, and specifically the emperor, also hold a key role in the structure of Amarrian religion. Often forgotten is their full title, God Emperor, with the notable exception of course being the Mad Emperor Zaragram II, who did in fact claim to be a supernatural worldly manifestation of God himself. The position of the Emperor includes responsibility of enforcing the scriptures, but this is invariably delegated to holders and the Theology Council. Other entities through which the Emperor delegates their will includes the royal houses, the Imperial Chancellor, the Imperial Navy, the Ministry of Internal Order, and other groups of the Privy Council. While on paper the Emperor has strong authority to punish any in these delegated organizations that do not carry out their direct orders, a savvy Emperor will avoid making widely unpopular decrees, as a unified refusal to carry out such orders massively undermines the Emperor's authority, potentially causing disruption to their perceived ability to continue ruling. The Emperor is also able to contradict or amend the scriptures to suit their will, turning them into more of a living constitution at times, with certain passages being removed or edited to suit the contemporary political sensibilities. The Emperor's legislative authority also reaches into the judicial realm, with the formal ability to hear legal disputes and make unappealable judgments as the highest authority in the Empire. With the modern size of the Empire though, this is impractical and as a practice died out long ago. In the era of the Council of Apostles, succession worked through a vote within that council. But now, with the dissolution of the council and the reign of the royal houses, succession works through trials administered to the heirs by a committee of senior religious figures. These trials take a few weeks to complete typically, and although the actual nature of the trials is not public, there have occasionally been trials which became more widely known. For example, the frigate duels between designated house champions that took place during the succession that followed the death of Hydaran VII, ultimately resulting in the coronation of Emperor Dorian II. The current heirs to the Amarr Empire are Arim Ardishipa, Hamida Kador, Farrokh Khanid, Ursilia Khorazor, Arak Sarum, and Tunir Tashmakon. His Royal Highness the heir Arim Ardishipa, holder of Derelic and the domain of Ardishipa, is a faithful and devout traditionalist scholar considered a measured and balanced leader with an educational background in history. As a male of the Ardishipa family, Arim followed the Ardishipa decree of having his right hand amputated and replaced with a silver cybernetic prosthetic, adorned in his case with the golden seal of the Ardishipa family. Arim's interest in history likely came from his youth, which was spent in no small part around the rare and valuable artifacts stored on the estate of his uncle Yonis Ardishipa, the former heir prior to the coronation of the current empress. What might be more surprising is that despite Arim's current perception of strong potential in future succession trials, he grew up as somewhat of a black sheep in the Ardishipa house. Aram's father, Navy General Lirium Ardishapur, was disappointed that Aram sought more scholarly interests over martial, and nearly disowned him as a result. Any formal disowning was avoided for the sake of reputation and perceived schism within the house, but did ultimately mean that Aram was raised by his uncle Yonis for the most part. Since then, Aram has written several books about the Amarr Empire's history and been heavily involved in his uncle's various public initiatives, as well as starting a few of his own. Prior to his formal position as heir, Aram was frequently Yonis's proxy delegate to the Privy Council, so he garnered much experience in the inner machinations and politics of the Empire during this time. Aram's traditionalist sensibilities do mean that some serious reforms are likely should he become emperor in the future. It has been noted that he would push for better treatment for the Empire's slaves, as well as a complete ban on transcranial microcontrollers, a divisive slave control tool that especially sees popularity in the Khanid Kingdom. Her Royal Highness the heir Hamida Kador, holder of Kador, has a reputation for aptitudes in intrigue and negotiation, but also a short temper and a tendency to be affected by the great deal of familial trauma she experienced in her formative years. Her mentor in navigating the complex upbringing of a royal in the Empire was Timur Kador, herself the appointed heir of Emperor Hydaran VII during the YC-105 succession. Timur, while held in extremely high regard by Hamida, was not widely respected in the influential circles of Amarrian royal politics. Her nominee for the Amarr Championship, a true Amarrian by the name of Warhound, did not even make it to the final. The final battle between another true Amarrian, Ecliptical, representing Dorium Corazor, and yet another true Amarrian, Shrike, representing Jamil Sarum, ended in a House Corazor win, bringing about the reign of Emperor Dorium II. This being the very same Jamil Sarum suspected of cloning herself, who after a 3-year power vacuum brought about by the Karsoth Interregnum, succeeded Dorium to be Empress Jamil I from YC-110 to YC-117. Incidentally, Jamil Sarum's unsuccessful Capsuleer champion Shrike, now better known as Samole, went on to exert vast influence on New Eden in his own right as the leader of the Alliance Band of Brothers. Bob, as it is often known, was one of the most powerful alliances in the galaxy at one time, and perhaps unrivaled in infamy to this day, despite the alliance itself not standing the test of time. As per Amarrian succession ritual custom, Timur Kador committed ritual suicide or Shethal Sin shortly after her loss at the YC-105 Amarr Championship. This caused immense pain for Hamida, who was said to never truly recover from the grief. Far from the only close family member she lost at a young age, she also mourned her younger sister and her mother to a hereditary pulmonary disease. Many on her father Acazium's side of the family also perished at the hands of hereditary geriatric neuromuscular atrophy, better known as Tourette disease. A cruel disease which steadily atrophies the body from the extremities inwards. Once it reaches the heart and lungs, it hinders the body's ability to fight secondary infections, often leading to a slow and painful death. There is no known cure. While incredibly rare overall, the disease relies on the inheriting of 7 recessive genes that are native mutations to the true Amarr bloodline. It was Tourette disease which eventually claimed the life of Emperor Hydaran VII of House Kador, triggering the YC-105 Amarr Championships in the first place. Naturally, genetic screenings were conducted on Hamida, who was blissfully spared from inheriting the genes, a fact oft attributed to divine blessing. The loss of so many family members, and especially that of her mentor, caused Hamida to mature perhaps before her time, becoming independent and taking on responsibilities far earlier than most royals. She had been passed over once before as the house's heir after the assassination of Emperor Dorium II by Court Chamberlain Dakuta Karsoth, the Empire's subsequent interim leader from YC-107 to YC-110. She was considered too young at the time for this role. She worked closely with the previous heir Urium Kador for many years following this, becoming skilled in the nitty-gritty details of governance and logistics necessary for administrating the house's holdings, making her intentions and aspirations very clear. Following Empress Jamil I's death in the destruction of her Avatar-class Titan, TES Seraph, at the hands of the Drifters, Urium selected Lord Ithaca Hawk, Holderan Kador Prime III, as his champion in the upcoming trials. As he proved unsuccessful in this contest, Urium surrendered his life in the rite of Shethal Sin, and Hamida was made the new heir of the house on his recommendation. His Royal Majesty Farouk Khanid, King Khanid III of the Khanid Kingdom and Lord of the Marches, is the current sovereign of the Khanid Kingdom and Amarrian heir for the House of Khanid. He inherited the throne from his father Garka Khanid, King Khanid II, after the coronation of the current Empress Katiz I. Not his first brush with the throne, King Khanid II famously refused to surrender his life to Shethal Sin in the succession trials that led to the coronation of Emperor Hydaran VII, leading to the schism of the Khanid kingdom. He did, however, follow the rights of Shethal Sin after his second failure at the trials. Farouk was born as a political hostage of Dakos Khanid, an imperial loyalist and the perceived rightful heir of the Khanid house had Garka Khanid committed Shethal Sin as expected of him the first time. Dakos was of course ultimately unsuccessful in unseating his older brother or gaining widespread legitimacy as an heir, and thus Farouk was ultimately liberated and landed as the Duke of the Sib constellation. Prior to his ascension to the Khanid throne, Farouk developed considerable experience in administering the realm and in the general art of leadership and statecraft. After diplomatic relations between the Khanid kingdom and the Amarr Empire became more aligned, and King Khanid II was reinstated to the Privy Council, the king had to spend considerable time engaged in imperial politics rather than at his court. It was during this time that he appointed Farouk as the kingdom's regent in his absence. Farouk consolidated a lot of power during his regency. King Khanid II, a monarch of a state born from rebellion in itself, was keenly aware of the potential for schisms and political maneuvers by powerful state actors. In particular, the progeny of a wealthy Nakuni mining family and admiral in the Royal Khanid Navy, Zidarez Tol Jakar. Zidarez had carefully and methodically climbed the ranks of the navy through political power plays, bribery, and corruption. This, combined with an aging and unambitious Grand Admiral at the time, put her in de facto control of the majority of the Navy's assets. King Khanid II's paranoia of being usurped had paid off, and Zidarez's machinations did not go unnoticed. Rather than attempting to stamp out a powerful and by all means rather popular admiral, the king issued an ultimatum to Zidarez, laying bare his knowledge of her indiscretions in rising up the ranks. He would support and nurture her progress, absolving her of such sins, in return for an arranged marriage with his cousin Farouk. The existing Grand Admiral retired, allowing Zidarez to assume this role, empowering House Khanid and Farouk further. Her Royal Highness Ursilia Khorazor, holder of Khorazor, is the current heir to the Amarrian Empire for the House of Khorazor. Closely intertwined with the existing prominent royals of the family, she is the niece of Emperor Dorium II and the cousin of the previous heir and former Imperial Chancellor Aritzio Khorazor. That is not to say that she was popular within the house, however, as Aritzio held considerable envy for Ursilia's intellectual and political acumen, leading to a long-lasting rivalry between the two. This finally concluded when Emperor Dorium II allowed Ursilia to serve the interests of the house outside of the royal court. And serve the interests of the house she did, becoming a prominent figure in the Ministry of Assessment as the head negotiator for the Amarr Empire. Aritzio, following his cousin's rise through the organization's ranks, used familial political leverage to arrange a marriage between Ursilia and a powerful holder in the Nimidaz constellation of Khorazor. While increasing her material wealth, this left Ursilia playing second fiddle to her husband for some time, only deepening the rift between the two cousins. The rivalry reached a fever pitch after the death of Emperor Dorium II, at which point Aritzio became the head of the royal house of Khorazor. Ursilia even went so far as to support Aritzio's internal enemies with the ultimate goal of deposition and assassination, to prevent any potential possibility of Aritzio becoming the new emperor. Aritzio's governance of his house, however, was a failure in its own right, regardless of any political meddling, and quickly drew the ire of the empire. The government subsequently sent a Speaker of Truths to investigate allegations of misconduct on behalf of the Theology Council. Despite capsuleer attacks on the Speaker of Truths by Holland Reclamation and Salvage Corporation, loyalist capsuleers of the Praetorians Imperialis Excubitoris and Ordo Quaesitoris corporations ensured his safe passage through the region, uncovering a litany of Aritzio's crimes. You could argue that the outcome was karma for Aritzio's envy, but what befell him would be considered by many a fate worse than death. It was in fact his considerably more vile and deplorable atrocities discovered on his holding of Lipera II that earned him the seriousness of his punishment. The Speaker of Truths, Brother Joshua, demanded that Aritzio sacrifice a piece of flesh for each crime he had committed, but such a volume of viscera would undoubtedly prove fatal, even with the royal penance reductions. Eventually, a compromise was reached, and it was decided that Aritzio would sacrifice just as much flesh as he could without succumbing to his injuries, and then a cellular regenerator would be applied to heal the wounds, so that the process could be repeated until the penance was complete. This punishment was so severe, the rules of the sacred flesh had to be clarified to not prohibit such cell regeneration, separating it from the forbidden act of self-cloning. His pride was an element in this suffering, of course, as he could have refused to hear the sentence. This was met, however, with a threat to be stricken from the Book of Records. Amarrians struck from the Book of Records in essence lose their soul in the eyes of the Imperial system, and more importantly for Aritzio, his royal rights. After going through his extensive punishment, Aritzio's relationship with Ercilia was somewhat reset, and they enjoyed an all-in-all rather cordial relationship until his right of Shethel Sin on the coronation of Empress Katiz I. Ercilia remained suspicious of him until she became more closely involved with his court later in life, wherein she witnessed the effects of the psychological trauma of his punishment, considering him a changed man. She has made clear since her succession as heir of the house that she considers herself a strong candidate, possessing all the skills and ambition to be Empress in the next succession trials. His Royal Highness Arik Sarum, holder of the Domain of Sarum, is the current heir to the Amarrian Empire for the House of Sarum. Despite undoubtedly being born with a silver spoon in his mouth, hailing from a family so recently sitting on the imperial throne under Empress Jamel I, Arik could be said to be as much of a self-made man as is possible for a royal. So much so, it was at the young age of 14 that Arik essentially disowned his own mother for her open belligerence to the then royal heir of the house, Mariq Sarum. He went straight from the privileged life of a young royal directly into a Sarum family military academy, where he saw great success as the result of his commitment to his service. Most prominently, Arik took command of the Sarum Second Fleet and remained a Sarum admiral for 45 years prior to his retirement. His hard work was rewarded by being landed with the Duchy of Mekios in the Domain region. Not finding his new political opportunities as Duke satisfying enough as a man of such ambition, he took on a more strategic background role for the Ministry of War, being made Tribune of Logistics, only resigning as a result of the Heideran Decree, which limited Royal House military autonomy. Far from willing to hang up his hat for good, he became Constable General of the Police and Border Forces, a brand new position designed to administrate the Sarum family's compliance with the Heideran Decree, following the decree's guidance to the least extent acceptable under law. Arik almost took on the role of heir earlier, prior to the coronation of Empress Katiz I. His willingness to voice criticism that others would be too fearful to comment on made him a popular candidate among the holders in the extended Sarum political sphere. It was Merimeth Sarum, however, with the blessing of Empress Jamel I, that took on the role of heir. After House Sarum's champion Lady Matara Newell, holder on Mekios, Sarum Prime III, failed to secure victory in the YC-118 succession trials, Merimeth surrendered her life to Shethel Sin, and Arik became the heir. This was of little surprise, as during her time as heir, Merimeth had granted unto Arak the title of Kilij Isani, meaning Sword of Blood, an honorific title in the Sarum cabinet invariably bestowed upon a chosen successor. While serving as the house's heir, Arik continues to be the Marshal of House Sarum, and is expected to bring his military mindset to the Empire should he prove successful in the next succession trials, whenever that may be. His Royal Highness Tunir Tashmerkon, holder of Tashmerkon, is the current heir to the Amarrian Empire for the House of Tashmerkon. Another heir who experienced a youth wrought with infighting between his close family and the dominant political powers of the house, Tunir experienced a great deal of upheaval as the result of his family's exile from Tashmerkon Prime when he was 16 years old. While he remained a royal by right, his family was sent to the Nathama system to oversee the Somi constellation. However, much like Arak, Tunir's journey through adolescence was in no small part motivated by a desire to redeem his family's reputation in the house. Tunir studied with the Hedion University, eventually graduating but remaining to assist in economic research and development. This resulted in close ties in the business world, giving him a substantial cadre of private sector supporters to this day. This reputation has helped in many high-profile negotiations, including a substantial trade deal between Notura, one of the largest agricultural companies in the Empire, and Transstellar Shipping, supplying the Galente Federation with the output of Amarrian farms and ranches, as well as perhaps the more shocking achievement of economic cooperation between companies of Amarr and Minmatar, with Core Complexion Inc. working with Tunir to operate in Amarrian space, and Joint Harvesting being given access to trade with the Minmatar. This knack for bilateral diplomacy between such powerful interests in New Eden attracted the attention of Concord, who eventually approached him to become the Amarr representative for the Secure Commerce Commission. His work at Concord includes the infamous Directive Alpha Gamma 12, which has set precedent for ensuring technological parity between the empires to avoid an arms race dominating the economics of the galaxy. He did not remain in Concord's service for good though, as in YC-110, during rising tensions between the empires of New Eden, Tunir returned to an Imperial role, consulting for the Empire on the Oris Emperor family station, primarily providing economic guidance. This position has put him in high regard with Empress Khatiz I, who unsurprisingly declared him as her successor after her coronation. Following this Imperial power shift into the family of Tashma Khan, Tunir also became first trade lord of the Tashma Khan family, collaborating with the SCC and benefiting greatly from his experience working with the galaxy's regulatory bodies. Should Tunir become the next emperor, carrying on the torch of Tashma Khan, there is little doubt his talents as a shrewd negotiator and broad understanding of economics could do much to benefit the empire. Whilst the imperial throne, its royal houses, and various powerful holders of the empire wield great power, the sheer size of the Amarrian realms demand a complex web of bureaucracy. The government is therefore separated into a variety of ministries and branches designed to delegate responsibility where necessary. While many such roles were previously handled directly at the hand of the emperor, the scale of the empire's challenges and the intricacy of their solutions make centralized decision-making on every minute state matter unsustainable. The Emperor family, probably best known for its academy station near Amarr 8, which serves as the empire's largest trade hub, is essentially the executive branch of Amarrian politics. Customarily, when a new emperor is chosen through succession trials, they are no longer considered formally a member of their royal house, but become part of the holy family of all the emperors. It's within this mechanism that vast assets are transferred from the previous emperor to the new one, without overly complex administrative burdens on person-to-person transfers. Estates and funds remain directly owned by the emperor family, to which control passes to the new emperor after each coronation. In charge of administration of the executive branch is the Imperial Chancellor. This individual is directly appointed by the emperor and has no other oversight. While the role is intended to handle the highest levels of imperial bureaucracy, it is not uncommon for the Chancellor to be an influential confidant, given their close and unmitigated access to the power of the throne. The Empire runs an official state-sanctioned news agency, Amarr Certified News. Headquartered in Gibam of Khorazor, the network operates at least 20 studio and publishing stations around New Eden. While ACN is given extremely privileged access to high Amarrian society and royal court politics, that is about the extent of its state involvement. While ostensibly the political powers of the Empire can censor and directly interfere with the activities of the network, there is no evidence of widespread editorial control or censorship. This might not remain the case forever though, depending on the whims of future powerful political influences. As with almost any government structure, the Empire boasts a hefty civil service branch, sometimes referred to as the Ministry of Civil Service. So vast in fact that it is to this day the largest employer in the Empire. The roles and responsibilities of the civil service are incredibly diverse and is itself divided into complex departments and roles. Nothing less would be expected though when you consider the tens of trillions of citizens relying on imperial law and order. The provision of permits and licenses, maintenance of public utilities, and mediation between other ministries remain some of its top responsibilities. Much like any other ministry of the Empire, the head of the civil service wields considerable power, especially in their ability to expedite otherwise lengthy processes. Its largest departments include the Central Department, Legal Department, Public Works Department, Census Department, and the Planetary Governmental Department. Of particular interest may be the Census Department, which is responsible for maintaining Amarr's infamous Book of Records. The Amarr Trade Registry, sometimes known as the Ministry of Trade and Commerce, is the Empire's centralized monitoring department for trade and communication, including both Amarrian citizens and foreign investors. Since regulations and trade enforcement is mostly devolved to the holders of each relevant domain, the Trade Registry functions for the most part as an impartial aggregator of such data, which can subsequently be examined and litigated by other entities. The Trade Registry, much like the Civil Service, officially answers to the Court Chamberlain. The Trade Registry's functions are mostly possible thanks to the wide-scale digitalization of financial transactions across the Empire, but those willing to trade in physical currency can typically escape such transactions being recorded. It does, however, work closely with the Ministry of Internal Order to identify patterns that could indicate intentional avoidance of the Ministry's gaze and therefore potential criminal activity. The Amarr Trade Registry also commonly acts as an intermediary between holders and their subjects for the purposes of collecting taxes and tariffs via the Ministry's sub-department, the Imperial Taxation Collection Office. Holders are perfectly within their rights to use their own tax collection bureaucracy if they prefer, so use of the Ministry services varies significantly by region. The previously mentioned Court Chamberlain is another branch of the Imperial governmental structure, but one which might as well slip into the realm of traditional or honorary role in more recent years. After some structural reforms by Empress Jamil I, what was once an almost vice-emperor role now predominantly serves nothing more than fulfilling traditional ceremonial functions. Nominally in charge of multiple ministries, the Court Chamberlain is a non-hereditary Privy Council seat that can be freely appointed by the Emperor. The Court Chamberlain is also a useful proxy for the Emperor in diplomatic delegations, where they can serve as an envoy for imperial interests and deliver messages on behalf of the Empire with full legal weight. Empress Jamil I's reforms of this position are unsurprising given her reign signified the end of the Karsoth interregnum, wherein Dakuta Karsoth, the Court Chamberlain at the time of Dorium II's assassination, exercised his right as an imperial regent in absentia of an emperor to delay succession trials and rule as an interim for 3 years. The Civic Court is at least on paper the Empire's primary judicial branch. In reality though, this privilege is held by the Theology Council. The Civic Court does deal with its fair share of cases, however, but these are limited to entirely secular matters and typically focus on small-scale disputes between commoners and extremely low-level crime. Matters within that civil court that result in disputed judgment are often escalated to the Theology Council for appeal. The Theology Council remains as one of the strongest forces in the Empire's governmental structure. Given the vastness of the scriptures and the Council's unique power to interpret and invoke them selectively, there are very few limitations on what the Council can and cannot do in the name of stamping out heresy. The Theology Council even hears cases that involve disputes between heirs and royal houses, giving their decisions serious impact on the trajectory of imperial politics. The council is comprised of specially trained priests known as justices, who are expected to have extremely good knowledge of the scriptures. One or more of these justices will oversee trials in which evidence and witness testimony is presented. A court-appointed inquisitor will then perform cross-examinations in which the witnesses are not given any rights against self-incrimination. The justices will then present a judgment on the case from a scriptural foundation and decide a sentence befitting the results of that judgment. The Ministry of Assessment is one of the many holdovers from a past era of the Empire which holds little relevance today. Understandably, in its early spacefaring days, it was necessary to have some centralized tracking and coordination of the exploration of unexplored star systems. Exploration of this nature is all but antiquated these days, massively reducing the Ministry's significance in modern-day politics. It does still maintain detailed records of celestial phenomena around New Eden, which is of course of great use to the Empire's many resource extraction companies, but it is usually those companies themselves that are in the business of prospecting for new deposits. On paper, the Ministry of Assessments withholds the right to terminate mining contracts, but this is a rare occurrence. It does also still administrate the awarding of new contracts in the infrequent circumstances in which one becomes available, meaning that despite its irrelevance 99% of the time, the Ministry continues to exist. The Ministry of Internal Order is, as the name suggests, responsible for the domestic security of the Empire, particularly in non-religious matters. It does, however, still retain some jurisdiction over the theological, with its ordinator department, something of an inquisition. As you would expect, this is more of a joint departmental effort between the Ministry of Internal Order and the Theology Council. While the Amarrian Empire is not widely regarded as having a strong network of international espionage compared to the other 3 main empires of New Eden, it is the Ministry of Internal Order that the Empire's spies answer to. The Ministry of War needs little explanation, but its role has changed somewhat over the last decade. While for a long time focused on logistics and funding allocation, an agency focused on ensuring the high-ranking military leaders had the resources necessary to fulfill their duties, the role of the Ministry of War has been gradually slipping into one of strategic command. As you would expect for a trajectory like this, the workforce of the ministry has slowly been shifting away from bureaucrats towards military officials. Given the military itself is separated into various branches, the Ministry of War plays a key part in coordinating those branches and ensuring a central strategic doctrine is guiding the Empire coherently. The ministry does still retain its original logistical roles, even as they become less prominent, and as such is responsible for much of the procurement and outfitting of the Empire's armed forces. Occasionally, the power of the royal houses, as well as complex imperial relationships like those of the Amarr and Khanid kingdom, can cause the Ministry of War to be the centre of political friction as it seeks to stay within and fully utilise its jurisdiction. Speaking of military branches, there are three main Imperial military forces to consider when talking about the Amarr Empire: the Amarr Navy, Imperial Guard, and 24th Imperial Crusade. The Amarr Navy is responsible for policing the space lanes of the Empire, given the Hyderan Decree outlawed holders from performing this duty in their own domains independently. The Empire's ships take strong aesthetic inspiration from the Empire's theological roots, adorned with gold, white, or red in most cases. Their functionality focuses on energy weapons and thick armor plating. The Imperial Guard are more focused specifically on the protection of the Emperor. It's an elite force that requires the passing of many high bars to be a member in terms of aptitude, obedience, and devotion. Despite its primarily defensive duties, the Imperial Guard still maintains a considerable number in its ranks, and under the direct order of the Emperor can still be considered a dangerous force when used offensively. The 24th Imperial Crusade is the Capsuleer-led, Concord-sanctioned militia, constantly engaged in border conflicts and tit-for-tat system exchanges in the border regions where the Amarr and Minmatar empires touch. For some time, this militia conducted several joint operations with the Caldari State Protectorate, but this is no longer the case. An added responsibility in the last few years has been surprisingly one of mutual interest with the Minmatar Empire, that of defending the border regions from the increasingly common insurgencies by the Angel Cartel-aligned Malachim Zealots. And with that, this brief overview of the basics of Amarr's lore is done. Like I said at the beginning, there's so much that I didn't cover in here, and if any of this interested or captivated you, I highly recommend checking out EVE Online's bespoke lore website, as well as its many books. If there's anything I mentioned that you'd like me to go in more depth on, or you just enjoyed the video, I'd really appreciate you letting me know in the comments. Make sure to subscribe too if you want to see more of this kind of thing in the future. I'd love to do something similar with the other empires of EVE here and there between my other projects. If you want to help support the channel, consider buying your next EVE Online pack, subscription, or Plex from marqueedragon.com using the link in the video description. Use coupon code BILL at checkout for 3% off your order. I've also got YouTube membership enabled now. It's 99 cents, and for that you'll get access to my monthly video where I go through some of the interesting comments for each month, more of an unscripted rant if I'm honest, and I'm sure I'll have more casual unscripted content available for members too, as and when the mood arises. I really appreciate everyone that already signed up, as it's all helped me invest in the software and hardware I need to keep making better videos.